David, thank you for engaging in this conversation. It's become, I guess it's always cliched to say that we live in turbulent times, but I think people are maybe feeling that more now than in much of their lifetime. And you recently recommended a couple of books to me that I thought we could talk about. But I wanted to talk about them with the idea that other people might view or listen to the conversation with this word in my mind. The word is consolation. So the books are one's called Minds Wide Shut, How the New Fundamentalisms Are Dividing Us, or How They Divide Us, by Gary Saul Morson and Morton Schapiro. And then the other book is Wonder Confronts Certainty by Gary Saul Morson, one of the authors of the book on the New Fundamentalisms. And how I'm feeling this as consolation is a bit from my background as a pastor, um, that in these turbulent times, the consolation that we need, not unto certainty or division or fear or self-protection, but unto life, unto living, unto new possibilities. I had in my mind as a prayer as I was working through this repeated biblical refrain that God will lift up your head, um, as opposed to the idea of kind of hunkering down, that God will lift up our head, but not unto some kind of battle, but unto engagement with the other in life. As a pastor in an evangelical setting for many years, I knew that tendency that people could feel, and they felt it, I think, as something that was faithful to believe harder, to believe more. And so, without being too simplistic, it created, various categories of seeing different kinds of people. Most people, I think, in the frame of believing harder or believing more, counted themselves as failures in some ways. They could never believe enough. They weren't Christian enough. They weren't spiritual enough, and so that created all kinds of voids and difficulties. A few, and I think this would be worse than the first scenario I laid out, a few probably saw themselves as being able to believe harder and more, being the ones who truly got it. And often to me, those kind of represented like blocks of wood, in believing harder, becoming unable to encounter that what was left was just proclaiming um, a truth that was known, um, or assumed. Just all that was left was proclaiming and condemning. So these two books, Minds Wide Shut, Gary Saul Morson and Morton Schapiro, how new fundamentalisms divide us. And that's why I wanted to speak about this, because I think in these turbulent times, the divisions that people feel, we need consolation. And so I started reading that book, but then you recommended the other, Wonder Confront Certainty. So I started reading that one before I finished Minds Wide Shut. And there was so much in there that was consoling to me. It's not easy to read. It has a lot of warning in it, looking at history, looking at Russian literature, and thinking about that in the context of the present. But I found it greatly consoling. So I thought it'd be great to speak with you and hear your engagement with these works and other ideas. So why don't I start by just asking you to tell us about your engagement with particularly Wonder Confronts Certainty.
That is a book, it seems to me, it's Gary Saul Morrison's work of a lifetime.
Mhm.
Morrison holds a prestigious chair in Russian literature at Northwestern University, just outside of Chicago, and is one of the world's leading scholars on Russian literature. And he also writes occasionally in First Things.
Hmm.
So he's Jewish, a superb literary scholar, and wrote a essay in First Things called The Greatest Christian Novel, which was on Dostoevsky, in which he uses three chapters of Dostoevsky's Grand Inquisitor to speak about what I would call the existential gravity of the Trinity. It took a Jew to do this for us. It's really remarkable to me, remarkable. My sense, I mean, he must have worked on this work for, it really is the fruit of an enormous life of scholarship. But my sense is that he probably began to um, do this and pull it together because of what he saw
Mhm.
unfolding in liberal democratic societies, and particularly in the United States, where he has lived and grown up. And I think because of a deep concern, and I'm sure because of what you have flagged so well with your pastoral heart, this concern for consolation in the midst of trauma, in the midst of things falling apart that people had taken for granted for so long. And of course, what is falling apart in liberal democratic societies is perhaps democracy itself,
Mhm.
and certainly the way democracy has been shaped and what has been at the center of it for quite certainly through the last 40, 50 years, which is a particular kind of liberal and progressive vision, which has been focused on um, caring for particular communities of people who are seen to have been marginalized and placed in difficult places. So um, I think he must have written it, or at least this is part of what I drew from it. I was shocked as I read it to think about, first of all, I should say, this is an examination of what happened in Russia from
Correct.
the time of the ascendancy of the liberal czar
Yeah.
in 1870. This is the first liberal czar. That is, he's the czar which ended serfdom and restored property to farming families and what have you. And of course, Russia is a huge place, so that takes some time. But with that opening, that shift, that fundamental shift that occurred there from 1870 until 1917, until the Bolshevik Revolution, one of the things that also happened was that many, many different kinds of ideological preoccupations emerge. Uh, Various socialist, what communist obviously forms, right-wing groups, what have you. And during that period of time, an enormous number of people were assassinated
Mhm.
based on the certainties of these groups.
Yes.
And we see it culminate in the Bolshevik Revolution. So as I was reading it, I mean, I'm not making a comparison to those days in any direct sense, but the way in which well-meaning and caring people who take exception to certain things,
Yeah.
and sometimes quite justifiably, at least exception to the way in which they're framed, they become absolutely certain of what the opportunity is or what the real option is here. How do you be righteous in the face of this? How do you be righteous in the face of this? How do you then do the righteous work? And that leads to death dealing.
Yeah.
And I was so struck by a pattern that I saw in that. An element to flag in it maybe is that also was striking to me, and I don't want to belabor this. I want to get back to the heart of what you're after here, was that many of these movements became nihilistic.
Hmm.
That is, they no longer were simply wanting to be part of some kind of discussion or some kind of pressure to bring about what they thought the good life was, or a life that was better for certain people was, but they'd become so locked in and so despairing, they developed an appetite for death. And that was manifest outside in people that they saw as being the enemy, but it was also manifest in nihilism, in simply wanting to tear it all down,
Mm. Wow.
tear it all down. And I have been concerned about that in in liberal democratic societies as well, that it seems to me some of what's at the heart of at least the inner circle of some of these movements is that desire to tear it down.
That's I'm thinking of a quote from the book. I pulled some out and that to me resonates with what you're saying, or what you're saying resonates with this quote. Speaking of the party, so the Bolshevik Revolution and how truth becomes defined by statements of the party, not by
Right.
outside of that. The ability to see everything, theory and practice, the past and the present, others and oneself, precisely as required by the party at any given moment. The ability to think and act only in the interests of the party under any and all circumstances. That was Bolsheviks' partiness, as we called it. This partiness was almost mythical concept. I read that and think, again, thinking of my evangelical background, that whatever the movement is, political, religious, holding out as virtuous, right? Because this is what was happening there, holding out as virtuous, the idea that everything gets explained from within this frame. And I feel the same things you feel, like the tear it all down kind of aspect. What resonates with me about these books clearly is the ability to take the past and enlighten the present with that as warnings. But I think I use the word consolation because that's what I felt as Gary Saul Morson, and then his co-writer in the other book, Morton Schapiro, as description is being made of some of the terrible things that can happen. And then there can be a recognition, even in small ways. And so I'm not like you, not wanting to draw parallels between everything. That's what this is now. This is the Republican Party in the States now, or this is actually resist the temptation to draw those parallels. But when you see truth mentioned, and then you see from your own background or your own faith, oh, I can see how I did that, or I thought that was virtuous, and then being open. So I had in my mind kind of a three streams that come out in these works. The ordinary versus the grand. There seems to be a call to the ordinary, to life and faith, from my interest, life and faith in the ordinary. And then the human versus the ideological. So the first things I'm mentioning are come out as the good, the ordinary versus the grand, the human versus the ideological. So being committed to people more than ideas. And then finally, the title of one of the books itself, wonder versus certainty. Wonder being an openness, and certainty being obviously closed. Why do you think, and I'm just asking you as a thinker, a writer, a pastor, why do you think certainty has such a lure?
Fear. I mean, it's obvious fear. But I think underneath that fear, there is a longing. And I think this is where a lot of the misstep has been when we get concerned about this. The word evangelical is a precious word. It's a lovely Greek word.
Amen.
And we have such a beautiful Old English word, and it's rare across languages for words to perfectly mimic each other. But we have a beautiful Old English word that perfectly mimics evangelium, and it's the word gospel. Good news. Good news. They both mean good news. And my sense is that, well, you know this history a little bit, but back in 1909, those oil magnates in California called together a group of people.
Yeah.
And ironically, several of them were Princeton University professors.
Yeah.
And I noticed that Princeton University published Saul Morrison's book. So there's an irony here.
I
And
hadn't put that together. Yeah.
they produced the fundamentals.
Yeah.
And those were sent around to churches, pastors, ministers, Sunday school teachers, missionaries, and everybody. So your family, my family would all have been touched by that. So there was an effort that was made to And it was because of the development of um, the critical study of scripture and the development of liberalism and what that had meant, because that also has some religious roots to it. But what happened is that there was an attempt to squeeze the faith
Mm.
into a set of propositions and to convince people that if you believe those propositions, somehow you will be saved. And my sense is that for several generations of pastors and theological thinkers, lay people that cared about these things, they actually bought into the project. But here's what gives me comfort. I mean, I've known evangelicals all my life.
Of course.
One is you,
Yeah.
and I've known you for some time.
Yeah.
But if you think of what people who define themselves as evangelicals or fundamentalists, how they position themselves if they are engaged in what they see as a theological battle or a public issue of concern, if you walk into that register with them, then that's what you get. You get this uh, reduction of truth
Yeah.
to an idea, the reduction of theology to a theological cathedral of some sort or another, the way in which ideas can be shaped in a kind of totalizing way. But if you sit with them
Yes.
and you read a gospel narrative, you get something different, or you
Yes.
can get something different. Or if you inquire as to their own spiritual struggle, their own spiritual experience, that is, if you seek to move from the precinct of belief to the landscape of faith,
Yes.
you will find a different person there. And my own sense is that this struggle that occurred in the Christian tradition, I mean, particularly in North America, from the old fundamentalism, the fundamentalism of the teens, 20s, and 30s, which influenced my church background, certainly, to this new fundamentalism, that also is a huge move. The new fundamentalism is very different, and what's happened to the evangelicals in it is very different because evangelicalism has become a colonized word. It's become a political identifier. 40% of the Americans who identify as evangelicals don't go to church,
No, no, and don't
don't read
interest
the
in
scripture.
that. Yeah.
So the consolation part of this,
Yeah.
to my mind, and that is vivid in Morrison's writing about what happened when Dostoevsky came on the scene. What does Dostoevsky do? He is, and what does the novel do?
Yeah.
Like, what is the gospel and what is the Bible? You know, it isn't a philosophical work, first and foremost. It's not a moral recipe book, first and foremost. It's a set of narratives. It's a wonderful set of narratives. It's story told about story told about story that is unwrapping the human condition, and showing that the human condition is not grand. It's marvelous
Oh,
and modest, and it is full of missteps. And what is the gospel? What's the golden thread pulled through it? It's that the God of all the world, incarnate in Jesus Christ, meets you at the well, hears your heart, not in judgment, hears your heart, and sometimes speaks a word that makes it possible for you to hear your own heart. And when you hear your own heart, we come back to that word consolation.
mhm.
You move away from its opposite, isolation,
Yes.
the word consolation. You move away from you move away from certainty. I want to say a word about that, to wonder. It's not that there aren't things that one would hope that intellectually, theologically, you would have a certain commitment to,
Right.
obviously, and,
Scientifically.
and comfort with.
Yeah.
But all the great scientists that I've known a few great scientists, not the engineering folks, but the great scientists who were all atheists, were all full of wonder when they looked at the heavens. Why? Because their theories, which they treasure, and the propositions they put forward to prove, and they work on this with tremendous energy, is not the point. The point is the unfolding of life. It's the unfolding of life. And we are in the center of a tradition. You and I have both been given this marvelous Christian revelation, which says that God became human, took on our flesh, and walked among us. This marvelous revelation that says only when you meet the other person
Yeah.
and glimpse the image of God in them,
Yes.
only then the kind of, I call it humility, that is regroundedness, humus, develops again between you. And then you no longer suffer from the temptation to certainty. That
Yes.
is certainty which means that you have to protect something.
Yeah.
All the great heresies of the world, in my view, all the great heresies in the Christian tradition are born of men, usually wonderful men, marvelous men, fine thinkers often, who wanted to protect God. And as a result, they lost their sense that that's not the point. I come to give you life and give it to you abundantly. I did not come to give you an ideology,
Yes.
give it to you certainly.
Yes.
It's a very different thing.
Yeah. The, I mean, we use all the time something that we took from you. I won't quite say stole because you know that we're doing it. But in the nonprofit with which I work, we often say in their words that you shared with us, I think you heard them from your father, if I'm correct, that most people are better than their theology. And you just described that in terms of sitting with someone and
Everybody.
hearing faith. And that's where the consolation piece comes into me. It's not to sit in judgment over, some evangelical person who holds the certainty. It's to say, I've known these people who, when I think that most people are better than their theology, have a longing to live their faith. I am assuming, and I've often seen it, or I've seen it most often, they have a love for other people,
Yeah.
but somehow have picked up a concept that being open to the other is dangerous. And maybe to some degree it is, but being open to the other is not virtuous. That being closed is better. We also work in drawing from it. It's not something that you said to us directly, though you could have. In our nonprofit, we say that hopeful Christian faith is demonstrated in solidarity, not separation. We build this from the incarnation, that God came towards us in Jesus. So the concept that you can live out your faith by separating yourselves from people is a problematic concept. There's a lot of places where these themes are picked up in these two books, including towards the very almost psychotic, the violence that you speak about, the nihilism that you speak about. And then there's reflections that I see in this, then in evangelical culture gone wrong, but it's any culture. It's just that just happened to be the culture I grew up in, or was formative in my faith. Little lines, and this is where Morson quotes over and over again. I get these quotes that I'm just pulling out. He's usually quoting someone else because that's the nature of the book. This, in Russian literature, this here's something I really noticed. And you just drew it out so beautifully that, and I just see this as actually an example of this, the openness to the other. So this is a Jewish person explaining my Christian faith to me. Not only explaining my Christian faith to me, but opening me up to the kinds of things you've described. The negative things of that are little lines that he quotes, like how rudeness becomes sincerity. So if you're committed to ideology over idea over the human, then, and I've seen this, how a kind of rudeness like that comes from certainty um, becomes confused with sincerity. The more I believe, the harder I believe, the more aggressively I believe. That's almost virtue. But then Morson gives the opposite. I'll pronounce the name wrong. Olga Adamova Sliosberg. I think this is towards the beginning of Wonder Confronts Certainty, because it's going to open up why he's looking at Russian literature. She says, that was when I understood. I think she's in prison at the time, and she's allowed a book a month or something like that. But she says, that's when I understood what a really good book was, a book that would make you feel human again when you
Yeah.
read it. And this is my hope for this kind of post-evangelical, or this evangelical, using it in the cultural way, or this evangelical culture, is that openness. So if I could speak to the people, that openness you felt, that love you felt, that non-certainty that you felt, that wasn't faithless. That
It's
wasn't
a,
faithless. It was faithful.
yeah.
And I feel so sorry that we as leaders didn't have the confidence, the spiritual confidence, to connect with that uncertainty to help it become wonder, rather than to set up a system that was, um, okay, be careful. Here's all the dangers. Um, there's a quote that I wanted to get your feedback on. I can't remember who said it. Actually, I'll find it. But Morson talks about, I don't know if it was Solzhenitsyn or someone, but anyone in one of the works that he's referring to describes a person who goes from certainty to certainty. Um, and so here's the quote: "No sooner does one infallible truth fail than he flings himself headlong into another. The experience of repeated disconfirmation never teaches him caution or skepticism. Always as certain of his present philosophy as he was of the ones preceding it, he retains an absolute intolerance of anyone who thinks differently." Maybe like respond to that, or you could like, why are we so given to intolerance? Um, just tell me what you think.
Yeah. I, I, with just one little preamble, what you describe, and you and I care about the evangelical world a lot because it's part of our historic community, and we both see it as one of the significant strands of modern Christianity coming from the 18th century with enormous gifts. I mean, there's no other part of the Christian tradition that has done more to separate church and state than the evangelical church has done, which is ironic given what they're doing these
Yeah.
days. But that was part of its great gift, the enormous capacity of evangelicals to respond in charity when there's a disaster,
Yes.
and many, 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 many other things. We care so much about that, so we tend to emphasize that. But the world I've lived in, having been teaching at the university all of my adult life and what have you, I know about this certainty within the progressive world. And I know about this
Absolutely.
rudeness. I know about this rudeness
Absolutely.
that, in fact, that world has also spent an enormous amount of time over the last 40 years saying very clearly, if you do not sign on with us,
Yes.
around DEI as we understand it, around this, around this, around this, around the set of particulars that we are concerned about, all in my judgment worthy of concern.
Of course.
But this is not worthy to say if you do not sign on with it like this, you are A, not part of our party,
Right.
B, we don't even really think you're quite fully human.
Exactly.
So what we've got is this pissing contest.
Yep.
And my sense is, I mean, I don't know who gave birth to this. My sense is they're twins, and and they feed off of each other. And it's trying to find ways to come at that on the bias in either case to try and open it up to the human. That's the great pastoral task. Um,
Yeah.
so that was my preamble, but now I've forgotten the quote.
Well, you'll remember in a moment. One of the things we often say again in our work with our nonprofit is that left-wing fundamentalism cannot be the answer to right-wing fundamentalism. And you could of course go vice
Yeah,
versa. That, and I think, but why these novels, like in Russian literature, bring these truths out so much? Morson speaks about realist novels,
yeah,
right?
the realist novel.
Lived in this. And then there are these just little pieces too. Sometimes it's just the smallest thing that enlightens. Um, he talks about, I think it's a character in Anna Karenina. The important thing for me is to feel that I'm not guilty. I mean, as I hear that, I think
Yeah,
of both the
yeah,
left and the right. The
yeah,
important thing for me is to feel that I'm not guilty. Tolstoy knows that all too often we support policies without even examining if they work because they relieve our guilt. And then he follows that up with something that really resonated with me when I recently again read Brothers Karamazov. It's early in the book, and Fyodor Dostoevsky, this rude, kind of just someone asks
perfect, perfect
someone asks
farmer.
him, "Why do you hate this other person so much?" And he says, "I'll tell you. He had done me no harm, but I once played a nasty trick on him, and ever since then, I've hated him."
Yeah,
How it is that we hate the victim or the other side or but you've probably recalled what you're going to say now.
yeah. This matter of moving from one certainty to another,
Right.
habit of mind. There are two things that I wonder about with it. I've written about this a little bit on occasion. One is I've wondered a little bit about the whole maturation process. I've had four beautiful children, and I've learned enormous amount from them. But I saw a little bit of it in them. Not much, but a little bit. But I've seen it in many, many young people, and I certainly saw it in myself as I reflect on it. When you reach your teenage years, there's a period in your teenage years where you become certain,
Yeah.
absolutely certain, and usually over against the authorities in your life, your parents, whoever else is in your life, your teachers, and what have you. And some people do this more than others, of course. And so I tend to think that that is a really important stage in human development because it's discovering some new significant thing, and then you hitch your wagon to it and explore it.
Right. You
And
learn. Yeah. Yeah.
you learn stuff from doing that. I remember when my one son came to me one night, over the dinner table and announced that he uh, he thought he was an atheist and a Buddhist. And I said, "That's great.
Yeah.
Uh, here's the part of my library that you can read on this." And he
Yeah,
read through it all.
exactly.
And he explored those things, and he explored them deeply and seriously. And because he's serious and has a good mind, he explored them deeply and seriously. And so then another certainty can arise, and you can explore that deeply and seriously. I wonder if some people don't get stuck
Yeah.
at being 14 years old,
Yeah. Or eight, whatever the age is now.
whatever the age
Yeah.
is, with this need
22.
for
Yeah.
certainty as a perfectly good thing to do. If as a parent you resist it, well, then you tend to drive them deeper into it instead of opening them up to explore it deeply, explore it
Right.
deeply.
Right.
So that's one trajectory. And maybe there's a similarity here. I have certainly noticed in my own church um, that there are people that will come and join, and usually rather quickly, who have come from some kind of very a small community, which I would characterize as being at least quasi-cultic.
Mm,
So what's a cult mentality? A cult mentality needs the cult, needs to cultivate the certainty. It doesn't need any particular, well, in the abstract, it doesn't need any particular one. It needs one that it's
right.
absolutely committed to, and then it can jump to another one. And we know from what sociological studies have pointed out in the last 50 years, I remember that great essay. I don't often quote sociologists, and I can't remember who it was, but wrote a lovely essay called The Circulation of the Saints, questioning the demographics in evangelical communities in America and Canada, and pointing out that all the stats are inflated because these people circulate. They become
Yes.
disappointed with their pastor.
Yeah.
They have some kind of falling out, so they go to another one, or they go to another one, or they go to another one. What does that do when you think that your faith community is a community of agreement instead of a community of embodiment? It's agreement, it's signing on. Well, that's to turn the church into a club or into a cult. Whereas the church, the ecclesia, the great gathering, is those people that, at least in part, are going to commit themselves to working out their salvation together and to learn the deep otherness, even of the ones that you may agree with on everything.
Oh, that's so
That's
beautiful.
not, that's not, that makes no difference. Well, it's lovely to have that,
I
but
love hearing
think
that.
of the difference that exists in the mystery of all human beings.
Oh, I love hearing that. It actually really, you can feel, you can see it resonates with my heart, like the pastoral sense and people I'm thinking of. That why did I love them so much? It's not just the agreement. In fact, that's not the primary reason. It's the otherness. But then that informs us so much about the otherness outside that system of belief or that church or that denomination or whatever. One of the things that I found most difficult, though most kind of poignant and striking in Morson's work, was that he was unafraid to talk about cruelty and violence and how the jump can happen quickly once the certainty's there. There's a quote talking about people outside other, and whether it's certain models of conversion or defeating the enemy or whatever it might be, that again have in some ways informed some possible growth in evangelical settings, but to see the other as someone who must be defeated. Um, and I think he refers to this in one of the books, not only refuted, but defeated or eliminated. So here's
Mhm.
the quote. He says, each person in the bad category, the other, is automatically responsible for, is essentially the same as all others. So they're just non-believers, something like that. And I always, non-believer. Um, Unless one grasps this principle, one might be tempted to focus on a person's individual innocence rather than his membership in a previously privileged and powerful, and I'd add, and thus dangerous group. So the other is kind of dehumanized in this way. And of course, like you, I see this happening from the right and from the left. The
Yeah,
the the um, the call towards engagement is something that is itself categorized as unfaithful.
yeah,
And I have this kind of longing to say that desire you had to engage with the other, out whether it's inside your community, as you so beautifully described, or outside, is not faithless. It can be faithful.
not
Um,
only can be, it is the
it is.
disposition of faith. That's what faith is.
Right.
Faith is the disposition of the mind to welcome and regard and be attentive to what's coming to greet you.
It is. And I think that's where, I mean, to kind of we've been going mostly from wonder confront certainty here, and next time we talk, I'd love to mostly speak from the new fundamentalisms because I think it outlines really well our current religious and political
Mhm,
culture ways forward to kind of
mhm.
without referring to it much at all. But in those ways that your eyes are open to say, oh, so perhaps the way forward isn't like for our side to win this fight. It's something entirely different than that. But as we kind of move to close this, that openness that you talk about, you right away you say not only is that part of faith or that's faith, that is faith, the other as necessity. And in these
Absolute
communities
necessity.
where the other was always to be somehow, absorbed or defeated. I don't know the name. Likarev, again, somebody that Morson's quoting. no matter what science he chose, he always found that, quote, it has a beginning but not an end. And this is being expressed as kind of unfortunate. I was trying all these things, but they seem to have a beginning but not an end. And I was looking for the end. And so he could never arrive at a final answer. And I guess, my final bit for this conversation is to say that's letting go of the certainty, that is faithfulness itself, and the faith itself is realizing. And for me in my Christian faith, of course I would say, but it's always expressed as like aspirational, prayerful, that Jesus is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. So whatever end I am tempted to give is never sufficient, that is unto hope. Any last kind of reflections from you to?
I love the word end, but I love its Greek form, telos. That is, what is the ultimate purpose? And so, in that sense, when we look at both our teacher and model and our Savior, Jesus Christ, we see in the gospel narrative, find for me in the gospel narrative any encounter with the other that isn't other. I mean, one of the geniuses of your theological uh, wellsprings, Calvin, Karl Barth,
Yeah.
is that they had such a clear sense of the otherness of God. And that's a revelation. What's the point of that revelation? Well, the point of that revelation is to say everyone is the image of God. Everyone is a profound other. And that's a gift to us. It's
Yes.
the great
Thank you.
gift to us. And so instead of, I would maybe accent it the other way around, attend to the little murmurs of wonder that arise in people that have been captured by certainties.
Yes.
If we could attend to the little murmurs of wonder in them
Yeah.
instead of confronting the certainties.
Yeah.
I mean, I argued with fundamentalists since I was 10 years old,
Yeah.
my Sunday school teachers, because I grew up in that kind of home. And I think I often won, you know.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to realize this is really, really not really wrong. It's a form of sin. It's a missing of the mark because all you do is drive them deeper and drive yourself into the precincts of pride. Why don't you just wonder about the peculiarity of what they're caring about?
Yeah.
See if you can pull forth some understanding of that. And in that context, maybe, just maybe, one would move to the ordinary,
Yeah.
to the human, and to wonder.
Yeah. Amen. David, thank you so much. I'm picturing you as a 10-year-old arguing with the Sunday school teacher, and I'm one of the
It was terrible.
I think it's best to I know it's embarrassing now, right? I used to argue with my biology teacher or something like that. But um, in that kind of frame, and then I think of this as a parent all the time. What you've opened to us is an idea. Another one we say always often is we will do most of our damage when we're right in our lives. And this reminder to listen for the murmurs of that wonder, even in the people who we are categorizing as, caught by certainty,
Yeah,
is something better. So thank you so very much.
good to
I
see
look
you.
forward to our next conversation. God bless. Thank you, Dave.
Good to see you.